Montana Territory, August 1876. The river cut through the land like a silver blade, slow-moving and quiet under the late afternoon sun. Birds scattered from the cottonwoods as the sound of hooves broke the stillness, steady, unhurried, like the man riding them had nowhere urgent to be. But when Brandon Sutter crested the hill and saw her standing at the river's edge with a baby in her arms, his heart kicked hard in his chest. She was barefoot in the shallows, dress soaked to her knees, holding the child close. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes locked on the water like she was trying to convince herself of something she did not yet believe. Jessa. Brandon swung down from his horse, boots crunching the dry grass. Jessa Rowen, she turned. Her face was pale, lips trembling, eyes red like she had cried herself empty. "It's over," she said, voice low and cracked. "I can't do it anymore." Brandon stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "No, it ain't," he said. "It's just starting." The baby in her arms whimpered, and she pressed her cheek to the child's soft, dark hair. Brandon looked from the child back to her, and something behind his ribs twisted. She looked thinner than he remembered, worn around the edges, but still her Jessa Rowen. The girl he used to race horses with before the war. The girl who once kissed him behind the hay barn and never spoke of it again. Jessa blinked at him, disbelieving. "Brandon, I didn't expect. I was headed to Cutter's Bluff. Got word from a trapper that you might be here." His voice dropped. "He said you came alone," she swallowed. "I did." Brandon took a slow step forward. "Whose is the baby?" Jessa hesitated. "Her name is Grace," she said. "She's mine." Brandon nodded once like he had already guessed. "Where's the father?" She looked away. "Dead, months ago." He was never really in it, not when it counted. The air hung heavy between them. "I did not come to judge," Brandon said gently. "Only to help." Jessa looked down at the baby again. Grace had quieted, her tiny fingers curled in the neck of Jessa's dress. "I don't know where to go," she whispered. "I left the ranch 3 nights ago. My brother told me to marry a man twice my age, said I owed it to the family. I told him no. He threw me out." Brandon's jaw tightened. "You should have come to me." "I was ashamed." "Of what?" "Of everything." Her voice cracked again. "I thought I could raise her alone, but I'm tired, Brandon. I have not slept more than 2 hours in days. I have no money, no home." "It's over." He stepped into the river beside her, not caring that the water soaked into his boots. "No," he said. "It starts now." Jessa stared at him, her eyes searching. "Why would you help me?" Brandon brushed a strand of hair from her cheek with a touch so light it barely moved her skin. "Because I have not stopped thinking about you since we were kids. Because when I heard you were out here on your own, I could not breathe right until I found you." She blinked fast, tears rising again. "I do not have anything to offer you. You already gave me everything," Brandon said. "When we were 16 and you kissed me behind the hay barn, you gave me something I never forgot." Jessa looked down at Grace. "She deserves better." "She does. So come back with me. I got a little place near the Bitterroots. It is quiet. Clean water, a roof, a fire. You can rest." "You and Grace both." Jessa hesitated, then slowly nodded. "All right." Brandon let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He reached for her free hand, fingers closing gently over hers. They walked back up the hill, side by side, Grace dozing on Jessa's shoulder. Brandon lifted Jessa onto his horse first, then passed the baby to her before swinging up behind. One arm around Jessa's waist, the other steadying the reins, he turned the horse toward the west. The sun was sinking low, casting long orange shadows across the land. As they rode, Jessa leaned back into him, her body finally relaxing. Brandon pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You're home." They rode until the sky turned violet. Brandon never once let her go. They reached Brandon's cabin by moonrise. It stood in a hollow beneath the shoulder of the Bitterroot Range. Its roof sloped low against the wind. A split-rail fence circling a barn and a paddock gone quiet for the night. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. Jessa's fingers, still curled around Grace, trembled as Brandon helped her down. She didn't speak while he unlatched the door. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them. Wood smoke, lamp oil, the faint tang of dried herbs strung up above the hearth. Brandon shifted the rocker near the fire and brought her a folded wool blanket. "There's a cot in the back," he said, voice hushed in the flickering light. "But if you'd rather sit a while, I'll get you tea." Jessa nodded but didn't move to sit. Her eyes roamed the room, the hand-hewn shelves, the tin basin, the worn Bibles stacked near the window like she was still trying to decide if she belonged inside. "Is this yours?" she asked. "Built it myself," Brandon replied, setting a kettle over the fire. "Took 2 summers. I worked for a cattle outfit near Missoula in between, saved what I could." She looked down at Grace. The baby stirred, then settled again against her chest. "You ever think about leaving?" "Used to." He crouched near the fire, feeding in another log. "Before I had anything worth staying for." Jessa eased herself into the rocking chair, careful not to wake Grace. Her dress was still damp at the hem, and the back of her neck glistened with river sweat and dust. She didn't try to smooth her hair or fix her cuffs. She just sat, watching the flames, eyes hollow with the kind of tired that didn't sleep off easy. Brandon poured the tea into a chipped ceramic mug. She took it without a word, curling her fingers around the heat. He sat across from her on the hearthstones, knees drawn up, his hat resting beside him. "She's healthy," he said, nodding toward the baby. "Strong. She never cries more than she has to." Jessa's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Takes after my mother, I think." She had a kind of patience. He didn't ask about her mother. That part of Jessa's life wasn't his to open yet. "How long since you ate?" he asked instead. Jessa blinked, then looked away. "Sundown yesterday." He stood and moved to the cupboard, pulling down a jar of dried beans and a sack of cornmeal. "I'll start something." "You don't have to," she said. He paused, hands still on the jar. "I want to." She didn't answer, but she didn't stop him either. While he stirred the pot, she shifted Grace to her shoulder and closed her eyes for the first time since the river. The rocker creaked slowly beneath her, keeping rhythm with the baby's soft breathing. "Do you plan to go back?" he asked after a long stretch of silence. Jessa opened her eyes. "To my brother's place," Brandon nodded. "No." She looked into the fire. "There's nothing there for me." He didn't press. He ladled the stew into a bowl and set it on the low table beside her. She didn't thank him, but she picked up the spoon, and that was enough. After she finished, he showed her to the back room. There was only one bed, but he'd already made a space for himself near the hearth. "I'll sleep out here tonight," he said. "You and Grace take the bed. Door latches if you want it shut." She turned in the doorway, one hand steadying the baby against her shoulder. "You're kind, Brandon," he met her eyes. "You're safe here." She watched him a moment longer, then stepped inside. The door eased shut behind her. Brandon banked the fire and lay down on the braided rug, arms behind his head. The night outside settled deep and quiet. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped once, then was gone. Above him, the low beams creaked softly in the warmth. He stared into the dark, heartbeat slow and steady. She was here now. That was enough. For tonight, morning light filtered through the chinked logs, soft and gold, warming the cabin's quiet corners. Brandon stood at the edge of the paddock, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a bucket swinging from one hand. Dew clung to the grass, and the horses nosed the fence rails, ears flicking toward him. Behind him, the cabin door eased open. He didn't turn, just kept walking slow toward the trough, letting her choose her pace. "I can help," Jessa said. He glanced over his shoulder. She'd tied her hair back with a strip of muslin and pulled on a pair of his old boots, the tops flopping against her calves. Grace was bundled in a sling across her front, still drowsy. Her voice was low but steadier than it had been the night before. "You don't have to," Brandon said. "I want to." He handed her a smaller bucket, and she crossed to the well, drawing water with practiced turns. He watched her muscles tighten and release beneath the fabric of her dress, the way she braced her weight without jostling the infant pressed close to her chest. "You always were stronger than the rest of us," Brandon said, brow lifting slightly. Jessa dipped the bucket into the trough. "You never said that before." Didn't know how to say certain things back then. She looked at him, the distance between them filled mostly with morning and birdsong. "And now," he met her gaze. "Learning." They worked in companionable silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. When the chores were done, they walked back toward the cabin. She paused at the threshold, brushing her fingers along the doorframe. "Did you ever think about marrying?" she asked, eyes still on the wood. He stepped beside her. "Once." She turned, brows drawn. "There was a girl after I came home from the war," Brandon said. "Didn't last. I wasn't right inside yet." Thought maybe if I stayed moving, I wouldn't have to feel what I lost. Jessa didn't ask who or what he meant. Her eyes didn't press. I never thought I'd be asking another man for anything again, she said softly. But I need something steady. That what you're asking me for, he said. She hesitated. I'm asking if you'd want to build something with me, not just shelter, something that doesn't fall if the wind turns. Brandon looked at her a long time. Not many folks ask straight like that. I can't afford not to, Jessa replied. Not with her. He reached out and touched Grace's sleeping back, his hand warm and rough against the soft muslin. Then let's build it. Jessa's jaw tightened, but her mouth wavered into something close to a smile. Later that day, while Grace napped in a cradle Brandon had carved from pine years before, Jessa stood barefoot in the garden behind the cabin. Brandon knelt beside a row of beets, fingers in the soil. You planted late, she said. Didn't figure I'd have mouths to feed beyond my own. Jessa crouched and pressed her hands into the dirt beside his. Then we'll make up the difference. They worked until the sun leaned westward. Brandon showed her where the fence needed mending and how the back trail led to a stream lined with wild mint. She told him about her mother's tobacco pouch, still tucked in the lining of her travel bag, and the way Grace had smiled once in her sleep during thunder. When the stars came out and the fire was lit again, Jessa fed Grace by its glow while Brandon carved quietly at the table. Nothing loud passed between them, only the occasional murmur when the baby stirred or the wood snapped. Brandon didn't speak of a future in big words. But when he laid a second cup on the table beside his own, when he set Jessa's boots near the hearth to dry, when he drew the curtains so Grace wouldn't wake too early, those things spoke. And Jessa, who had once stood chest deep in a river believing she had nothing left, now closed her eyes with the weight of his presence near and knew she had begun again, not out of desperation, but out of choice. The first rain came 3 days later, steady, quiet, tapping on the roof like it belonged there. Brandon stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching it soak into the thirsty earth. Behind him, Jessa sat at the table measuring flour with the practiced rhythm of someone who'd done it more times than she could count. Grace lay curled in a basket of blankets beside the hearth, her breathing soft beneath the patter of the rain. You always bake when it storms? Brandon asked without turning. Only when I've got flour to spare, Jessa said, which wasn't often, but it calms my hands. Brandon stepped inside and let the door swing shut. Smells better than anything I've burned on this stove. That's because you stir with a pocket knife, she said, glancing at the blade he'd left beside the kettle. I found it in the batter bowl. You didn't need to bring that up. She poured water into the dough, smile flickering across her face, but her hands stayed steady. Brandon moved to the cradle and knelt beside it, brushing a finger along Grace's cheek. She's got your mouth, he said. She's got her own, Jessa replied. Already tries to boss me with it. Brandon looked up at her. You want her to be like you? Jessa leaned on the table, the dough beneath her palms. I want her not to need to be, but if it comes to it, yes. Brandon stood, wiping his hands on a rag. He walked to the shelf and pulled down a folded cloth, laying it beside her. What's this? She asked. Something I started before winter last. Didn't know who I was making it for, just kept stitching. She unfolded the cloth slowly. A baby quilt, small and crooked, each square cut from old shirts and feed sacks. The stitches were rough, but they held. In one corner, a faded patch of blue calico. I remember this, Jessa said. You wore that shirt the year we raced out to Clancy's wash. You won, Brandon said. You let me. I didn't. She looked at him, then down at the quilt. You never throw anything out, do you? Not the things that matter. She folded the quilt again and laid it across the back of a chair. Brandon, she said after a long pause, do you ever think about what kind of man you want to be? He met her eyes. Every day. I never used to, Jessa said. I just tried to be the one everyone needed. Daughter, sister, wife. I never thought past that. And now, I think I want to be the kind of woman who builds something that lasts, even if it's small. Brandon moved closer. You already are. She looked up at him, something quiet and certain in her gaze. Then I want to build it with you. Neither of them moved for a moment, just stood in the stillness of the cabin with the rain soft against the roof and the baby sleeping warm in the cradle. Brandon reached for her hand, rough palm closing gently over her fingers. "We'll start with bread and quilts, then we'll see what else this life wants from us." Jessa didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. That night, while the rain deepened into a hush, Brandon fixed the cradle beside the bed and laid Grace down on the quilt. Jessa stood watching from the doorway, arms crossed, her shoulders loose for the first time in weeks. He turned down the lantern, the room folding into shadows and warmth. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll be here if she wakes." Jessa stepped to the bed, pulled back the blanket, and looked at him over her shoulder. "Stay," she said, not a question. Brandon crossed the room and lay beside her, fully clothed, their hands meeting above the quilt between them. Jessa closed her eyes. "It's still raining, I know." She turned her face toward his. "It sounds like a beginning." He squeezed her hand once, firm and sure. "It is." By the end of September, the aspens behind the cabin had turned gold and brittle, their leaves whispering against each other like secrets passed hand to hand. The air had begun to carry the bite of winter's promise, and out in the worn pasture beyond the barn, Brandon split wood with steady strokes, the axe thudding deep into rounds of larch. From the open window, Jessa watched him, sleeves rolled, jaw set. Grace lay on a quilt beside her, chewing on the corner of a linen square Jessa had stitched from an old shirt of Brandon's. The baby had begun to teethe, her gums pink and sore, but she fussed little, only nuzzled close when the ache got bad, pressing her face to Jessa's shoulder, sighing deep like she trusted the pain would pass if she stayed near enough. Brandon came in before sundown, cheeks wind-burnt, arms dusted with sawdust. He washed at the basin without speaking, water darkening the front of his undershirt, then dried his hands beside the stove. "You get that beam set?" Jessa asked, tying off the last knot in a length of twine she'd been using to bind herbs. "Mostly." He glanced toward the back room. "I want to add another brace before the snow sets in." "Roof's solid, but I don't want to test it." She nodded, then stood and crossed to the shelf. From a tin box, she pulled a folded paper and handed it to him. He opened it slowly, reading the first lines without speaking, then looked up. "This you're writing, it's a petition," she said. "For a schoolhouse. A few folks near the creek bottom said they'd sign if someone brought it to Reverend Clay. I thought maybe I'd ride out come Sunday." Brandon folded the paper again, set it gently on the table. "You think you'd want to teach?" "I did before everything changed. I used to dream about it when I wasn't shoveling stalls or patching seams. I don't know if it's possible now, but I figured I'd try." He stepped closer. "You don't need to ask me. I'm not," she said. "But I wanted you to know." Brandon reached out, brushing a bit of flour from her wrist. "Then I'll hitch the mare for you Sunday morning. You'll need a warm coat." Jessa held his gaze. "We're not waiting for someone else to tell us how to live anymore, are we?" "No," he said. "We're not." That night, after Grace fell asleep curled between them, Jessa reached for Brandon's hand beneath the quilt. "My mother once told me," she whispered, "that love takes root like a tree. Quiet and steady, until one day you look up and realize it's been holding the ground together under your feet." Brandon turned toward her, his voice low. "I didn't know it could feel this solid." She leaned in, lips brushing his. "We made it that way." He kissed her again, not hurried, just sure. By late October, Brandon had finished the brace in the back room and built a second cradle from leftover cedar. Grace had outgrown the first quickly, her legs strong and eager to kick. Jessa had begun teaching letters to 2 children from the next ridge over, their mother staying nearby to watch over Grace while Jessa worked. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, Brandon would sit on the porch whittling while Jessa read aloud by the door, her voice soft but clear, the rhythm of her words rising like music across the yard. They didn't speak much about the past anymore. Not because they'd forgotten it, but because it no longer owned the space between them. The weight had lifted, not vanished, but shifted, settled into something that no longer pressed down on them with every step. One evening, as the wind turned sharp and the sky threatened its first snow, Brandon came in with a bundle wrapped in canvas. He laid it on the table and stepped back. Jessa opened it slowly. Inside was a dress not new but carefully sewn, the fabric deep green with a hem finished in tiny, patient stitches. "I traded for the cloth in town," Brandon said. Mrs. Larkin helped with the pattern, said it'd suit you. Jessa touched the sleeve, her throat tight. Why? I figured if you were going to start teaching proper come spring, you'd need something that made you feel as strong as you are. She stepped close and laid her head against his chest. I don't need anything more than what you already give. I know, he said. But I like giving it. That night, they lit the oil lamp early and sat close by the fire, Grace asleep between them, her hands curled into tiny fists. I was thinking, Brandon said, come spring we could plant another row of beans, maybe build a bench for the porch. Jessa looked at him. And after that, he turned toward her, the fire catching in his eyes. Whatever you want, Jessa. This land's ours now, we build what we choose. And they did. Through the winter, they weathered the cold together, keeping the baby warm, keeping each other close. Come thaw, the schoolhouse petition passed, and Jessa began teaching twice a week. Brandon expanded the barn, fenced in a second pasture, and carved Grace a wooden horse that she later dragged behind her by a length of rope. They married quietly, under the cottonwoods, with only the mountains and the river to witness. Jessa wore the green dress. Grace held a handful of dried yarrow, and Brandon's voice didn't waver when he spoke his vow. Their life wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It held no grand declarations, no sudden turns. Only the steady rhythm of mornings shared, labor done side by side, and love deepening with each season that passed. And as the years turned, the tree outside their window grew tall, its roots strong, its branches wide enough to shade the three of them, and more still to come.